All right, everybody, for folks who are just joining again, we're going to give it about 2 more minutes before we get started. Again, thank you so much for coming to night 2 of our Civil Rights Advocacy Training Institute. We have a really special webinar for you in store this evening. Again, if folks are not able to join the Zoom room, definitely direct them to the NAACP's YouTube channel. This will be streaming on there in about 2 more minutes. We definitely want to make sure people have access to it. But while you're waiting, definitely feel free to drop where you're calling from in the chat. I see White Plains is here. The Westbury branch is in the building. We got Nashville, Tennessee. Who else do we have here this evening? Indiana is in the house. New York, Pennsylvania. We got South Carolina, Arkansas, Illinois, Florida, Wisconsin. Thank you all so much for joining this evening. If you were a part of night 1 of CRATI, definitely feel free to share some of your highlights and some of the great trainings that you got from our field team. We got some more in store this evening as well as the rest of the week. I see Des Moines, Iowa is in the building. Let me drop that YouTube link again here for you in the chat. You can also just go to YouTube directly and put in NAACP, and it should be the first link that pops up there for you. But thank you so much for joining this evening. Amari, I got the go ahead to start. Perfect. Well, again, everybody, thank you so much for joining. My name is Wisdom Cole. I serve as the Senior National Director of Advocacy for your NAACP. And really excited that you could join us this evening for night 2 of our Civil Rights Advocacy Training Institute. Tonight's call is a community call to action. We are discussing George Floyd, 5 years later, accountability, action, and the road ahead. I know many of you 5 years ago took action with us to really ensure that we were pushing and ensuring that we took accountability for the murder of Black lives that were happening in our community in the midst of 2020 throughout a national as well as global awakening. We are 5 years later from that, and things have drastically changed. We want to ensure that we are talking about the work that we've done, but the work that is still to come and ahead of us. And so I'm excited to turn this evening over to our Director of Race, Opportunity, and Justice, Ms. Kesha BRS, who's going to lead us through tonight's webinar. Kesha, you there?
Hi, Wisdom.
Perfect.
I am here. Well, thanks everybody for joining. My name is Kesha BRS. As Wisdom mentioned, I am the Director of Opportunity, Race, and Justice for the NAACP. I work on our economy and our diversity, equity, and inclusion platform. And tonight we're going to take you all through a journey, not just about the now and the then, but really thinking about what we need to do as a call to action and where we are on the 5-year mark. I'm really excited to introduce Dr. McGee. She's joining us from the George Floyd Foundation. So she and I are going to talk about Beyond the Verdict, and I'm going to give you all some economic information. What happened before, what people committed to in Black communities, and what companies and people didn't fulfill those commitments. And then we're going to sum it up with Wisdom having our call to action. Next slide. So, over the weekend, we know that we've had a lot of different media responses. I had the opportunity a few years ago when I took a class at Simmons College of Kentucky to read George Floyd's book. And I found something over the weekend in an article that had come out from NBC, and I wanted it to read to everybody to set the context of what we're thinking about and how we need to really embrace this moment. The article starts and it says, 9 minutes and 29 seconds was enough time for 46 cars to pass 38th Street and Chicago Avenue. In the same 9 minutes and 29 seconds, 18 customers went in and out of the convenience store on the corner. 6 patrons bought beverages or snacks from the coffee shop across the street. 4 people signed up for a guided tour of the neighborhood in front of the gas station. 4 visiting Chicagoans took pictures of flowers, stuffed animals, potted plants, posters, and other memorabilia that form the makeshift memorial we see today. For 9 minutes and 29 seconds on May 25th, 2020, Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin pressed his knee and the weight of his body against George Floyd's neck. And at this very intersection, as George Floyd called for his mother, and in his final words, Chauvin killed him in the street as people watched. 2 officers stood by and held him, the unarmed, handcuffed Black man, down. And the third monitored the crowd that was stunned by what they had witnessed. And that is what happened on May 25th in 2020. And we think about that, and why that article was so touching to me was people were going on at their lives while this man's life was being stolen from him in real time. No justice as he cried out for his mother, bystanders standing by, and his life was gone. And I think that we could all remember there are things in our history. There's different places that we have been in our history. If we've been along this journey together around civil rights and social justice, we all remember where we were on September 11th. We all know when we were when Desert Storm started. You know, I just aged myself, by the way. I said Desert Storm. All of us know that the time that we had first seen or heard the audio from the murder of Breonna Taylor. We all know where we were at when we saw the video go live stream of Derek Chauvin putting his knee on George Floyd's neck. And so what did that do for our community? Well, there was a couple things. The first is it led us to the Summer of Unrest. So in 2020, we had multiple killings of Black innocent people in the community, and that struck widespread protests. I had the opportunity to do an interview a few weeks or about 2 weeks ago regarding the 5th anniversary of George Floyd. And one of the questions that were posed to me was, what did you see differently? And what I could say is at the time that that happened, there was organization, there was advocacy, there was justice. People were in the streets pushing and fighting for the lives of Black people. Black Lives Matter movement took control. Social media was used as a positive at that time, meaning companies were called out that didn't support. People were held accountable for racism in real time. Corporate pledges towards racial equity was a thing. So you all remember seeing on social media every company making a statement about their support to equity, specifically racial equity, which we had not seen that type of movement around companies in the past. We had the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. There was an advocacy around that. People wanted safer places to be from police. Police brutality was no longer tolerated. Numerous calls for police reform was happening across the country. We also had the movement of defunding police. How do we look at community-based solutions? The one thing that I would say that I've seen, and it was a positive, was the amount of organized advocacy. The NAACP, National Urban League, Southern Poverty Law Center, all of these different groups that had come in and said, we are going to rally our people for justice. And the justice looked similar to the murder of Trayvon Martin when that particular widespread protest happened. But this was very different. There was an intentionality and a spirit behind it. And so the Summer of Unrest really changed the dynamics when we look at how social justice was in this particular time, almost reduplicating or reemphasizing the need for the civil rights movement. So where are we today? Well, 5 years later, we thought and we think that there could be opportunity for change. We've made some progress, but the reality is we have an administration that does not support the benefit, the progress, and opportunity of Black people. We have nationwide push for racial justice and There's a nationwide push for racial justice to end. There's a backlash, faces setback. Experts note historic patterns of racial fatigue. People are tired after the election. All of the hard work that you all have been doing, people are tired. Congress pledges for racial equity amid skepticism. President Trump just recently, and it's by intentionality, completely went ahead and took away the agreements to overhaul police departments in Minneapolis and Louisville. If you all remember, they went through a significant investigation because of all of the turmoil that they had put their community through and the unethical practices. And Derek Chauvin's pardon, that recently came out, almost completely diminishing the law and him being held accountable for the murder of this man. And now we're moving backwards on police reform. So with that said, we have a 5-year mark. We always have to remember, however we continue to have progress, we always have to stop and take a moment of silence and be available, say their name, and continue to uplift them in what we do. So now I'd like to have everyone take a 1-minute moment of silence for the murder of George Floyd. So thank you, everybody, for taking the moment of silence. And I hope that no matter where you are and what you're doing, all of your prayers are uplifted and we continue to protect our people and community from these issues, from these murders, these senseless tragedies that continue to happen. Next slide. So today I'm really excited to have our guest that's joining us for our call today, Dr. McGee. Dr. McGee, a distinguished healthcare professional, educator, and nationally recognized advocate for social justice. She currently serves as the president of the George Floyd Foundation, an organization she co-founded in the aftermath of her cousin, George Floyd's tragic murder. In her leading, she has transformed personal grief into a powerful catalyst for national change, working at the intersection of healthcare, racial justice, and youth empowerment. With nearly 3 decades of experience in healthcare, Dr. McGee holds a doctorate in nursing practice, along with both a master's and a bachelor's degree in nursing. Under her leadership, the George Floyd Foundation has led impactful programs and initiatives focused on social justice, workforce development, and youth services, ranging from community rallies and panel discussions to back-to-school drives, summer camps, and training initiatives. Everyone, I'd like you to please welcome Dr. McGee from the George Floyd Foundation. Dr. McGee, we are so happy to have you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So Dr. McGee, we had an opportunity to talk prior to you joining the call today. And I know that the first thing I asked was, man, this must be such a busy time for you. So I want to actually jump right in the questions because I think our first question really ties into what we're talking about. So, you know George Floyd personally. You have led his work in his name. So I want to ask you a question just to ground us in this conversation. What has the 5-year mark meant to you personally and for the foundation?
Well, that's a great question. And as I sat here and listened to you sort of recap, where we started, in May of 2020 to all of the things that have occurred thus far. I think for me personally, each year has been an opportunity for me to sort of reflect on, the personal loss that we've had, and then also to then start to recommit myself to doing the work that I need to make sure that change does take place. Um, it's very difficult sometimes, and of course, anybody who has lost a loved one knows that the pain comes and goes, and sort of ebbs and flows. And I think what helps me is having opportunities like this to be able to speak with other people who are interested in doing their part to make sure that his death is not in vain.
So Dr. McGee, I actually am a Louisvillian. I am in Louisville and was in Louisville when the entire community was devastated by the murder of Breonna Taylor. And so we know the Summer of Unrest, but in George Floyd's case, you had global impact, national protests. People were tired, they were fatigued. And so looking back, how do you reflect on the moment now? What did all that mean to you? And what is the misunderstanding from all of that rallying protest people may still have in their minds?
Well, I think then, so immediately following his murder, I think the overwhelming amount of support that we had from all over the world uh, absolutely was something that kind of helped us keep going. I mean, it was unbelievable. And I think, I guess the best words that I can come up with at that time, it felt like an out of body experience because initially it was like a personal loss, and we really had no idea how significant an impact it would have globally, until we're starting to go out the door and can't get out because there are cameras everywhere and people just kind of wanting, to hang on every word just to kind of see what they were doing. And it felt like it wasn't trying to be intrusive. It felt like people really wanting to extend a hand to say, what can we do to help you get through this? Like we're suffering just like you are. And I think in many cases, the pain felt like they lost a family member of their own. It's one of the things I talk about often is that though George was our family member, George was representative of so many other people or impacted families. Um, so I think the misunderstanding that I think that immediately is that people thought because of the challenges that George had that somehow that his life um, was not valuable, and that there weren't people that who loved him and didn't matter to him what he went through, that he was somebody who we valued greatly. And I think the first thing we wanted to do is to make sure people understood that we did care about him, that he was loved, and he had a lot of people who were really hurting about the fact that he wasn't going to be around anymore. And so that point was something that we had to drive home because there was a lot of discussion about how he died. And, you could look at the TV or social media or anywhere and see that clip of him dying often. But it was really important to me to sort of talk about what happened in between there, that he had a full life, he was a full person, and that he had family, he had children, he had cousins, he had sisters, he had a mom, he had people who loved him. And so that was really important for us to make sure people knew that.
I read his book. I had mentioned that on the beginning. I read his book, and it was just so impactful. The loving and devotion he had to his family in this book. And that, some of the characteristics, Hugger would tell you that he loved you. Um, Always a smile on his face. It's a beautiful thing to see. And I think that negative narrative, you're so right, Dr. McGee, the negative narrative has been the defining of these murders. People find a way to justify the murder because of. And we've seen it with Trayvon Martin. We've seen it, we've seen it all the way through. I mean, think about all of that, and so I think you bring up a great point in the human dignity piece sometimes go missing in those
Yeah.
moments. Yeah. And I think that's impactful for people to take a step back and look at that. And I think in his murder too, there's that justice component. I think that we made some strides, but we're hungry for it. And so that kind of leads me into my next question. And so we have the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And prior, just right after it was something that was enforced, and it stalled. It was at a standstill. But we also see in some smaller areas and cities, there are wins, like wins are happening. Um, Tell me, in your view, where have there been real progress, and where are we stuck? Why are things stuck in some places?
Well, I think you make a very valid point. And I am choosing, and it's the messaging that I have, that we always have to celebrate those wins. And there were things that happened immediately in the local government, in our communities, like, barring chokeholds and making it the responsibility that they had to report other officers if they found them doing some things that were against the law, that they had a duty to report. So these across the board, we saw that in local government, you saw the changes immediately. At the
Yeah.
state level, we had, Texas had House Bill 88, which it didn't get passed in its entirety, but they passed portions of the bill. And I think by and large, everywhere where we were getting hung up on it was the qualified immunity piece, which is
Yes.
why the George Floyd Policing Act did not get passed. It was because of the qualified immunity. And
And
go
I was
ahead.
going to say, Dr. McGee, for folks who don't maybe are familiar with qualified immunity, what is that?
Well, it's just really, putting the officers in a position that they actually can be held accountable. They can be sued
Right.
when they are found guilty of doing something criminal. And, they just wanted to fall back from that. And I think if we were okay with passing a law, we didn't want something that was, ceremonial, that you just had something. It didn't have the meat and potatoes that you needed to really be able to hold them accountable. I mean, what's the point
Right.
if you're not going to have that piece in there? So that's been where we've been stuck. And that's a good word, kind of stuck there. But I think, after, I think the best climate for it to be passed was during that time. And when it wasn't able to get past the Senate, and then with President Biden signing the executive order, as you well know, that has been reversed at this point.
Right.
But, it's kind of like, we understood that. And I think the timing of that being reversed was kind of a messaging, to us. We're almost right at the anniversary of his passage. Just a couple of days shy of that. But the messaging for me right back is always that we're not going to give up, that we're still going to continue to fight for that. While we are doing that, I think it's really, really important for people to focus on those things that can be done locally. Not to allow this to break your spirit or to make you feel jaded, or that, you're tied up and can't do anything. You have to find other ways to still stay engaged and still stay involved, and while you are working towards that, but still doing other things, so that we don't lose our traction.
I think traction, that actually leads me to my next question. And here's what I'll say. I remember watching an interview. Um, it was a TV personality, and of course, a conservative was on his show, and she had mentioned we shouldn't be kneeling at games. We shouldn't be in the streets, the destruction of property, all these, again, false and negative narratives.
Mhm.
And a part of that, and I love what his response was in real time. And he said, no one is listening to our voices. So how do you want us to respond?
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
And so, but we also see where there's increased surveillance of protests, right? There's backlash and reform on it now. We're seeing, part of this new administration, just different spaces of mass deportation, people breaking in, police breaking into crowds, dismantling groups and unified people. And so how do you make sense of this rise in resistance? But then how do we also advocate in spaces that we need to be heard, but stay safe at the same time? And it's such a balance, Dr. McGee.
Yeah, I think obviously, I think these tactics are purposely done to, make people fearful of being doing this, for fear of being jailed or harmed in the process. But I think any sort of movement has required a segment for all of the areas. So there are going to be people who are activists. This isn't going to stop them. Like, these are people who are going to continue to do it despite what is happening. And then you're going to have other people on the other side that are going to be working, for social justice reform, like with policy and what have you. I think we all have our role, and those people who are standing firm on the activism piece aren't going to be deterred by these, because if the thing about it is that this isn't anything new, right? Most people who've been involved in activism, this is sort of a cycle. You see it happening. But I think those people just renew their commitment to saying, you're not going to make me back away from what I believe is right. So there are going to be some people who are going to shift and probably move in a different direction. But I think those people who believe that their role and what they bring to the table is being out there in the midst of protests, they're going to continue to do it despite what efforts they try to deter it.
Okay, so 5 years ago, we talked about the then, and now I want to take us to the now. 5 years later. Lots have happened in 5 years, right? Summer of Unrest, accountability, some justice, now with the new administration pulling back the justice, right? And so how have you seen communities respond differently today than you have seen them respond 5 years ago?
Well, I was always under the belief that the intensity with which people were behind it, it was going to settle. I mean, it's just like anything else. Right at the beginning, people are incensed, people want change, and people will protest and be loud and what have you, because there's this pain and people working through that process. But as things start to settle down, you'll see that kind of taper off. So I wasn't totally surprised that it would settle down. And that's why I personally felt like that as a family member, that we needed to be committed to making sure that we continue to be actively engaged and to make sure that we are constantly putting out reminders and opportunities for people to get involved. So there is that, the fact that we knew that that was going to happen. But I think what is really important is that people see that, one, that we are actively engaged in the process, and that two, there are opportunities for people to see. Like this past weekend, we had it's the first we call it the Movement Festival. We had 4 days here in Houston where we for people to have opportunities to get involved. And the first day started off with what we call the report card that was on May the 22nd, where we had a panel discussion similar to what we have here, but just we talked about like where we started and where we are now, and how is it that people can stay engaged going forward. And then on the second day, we had an opportunity for people to come out and sort of look at the community and see, the culture of where he grew up and what have you. On the Saturday, we had dinner en blanc where people could gauge. We had a music concert outside with boots on the ground contest, but the boots on the ground was really a take on not just the dance, but for people to have boots on the ground in terms of being active in some way to be part of the movement. And then the final day was a day of worship, and we had a balloon release at the statue we have here in the city of Houston. So the 5th year, it was really important to not just we typically had just the one day where we would do something on the 25th, but we wanted to kind of expand on it, because often there are questions about, what can I do? Where can I insert myself? Like, if I want to get involved, and, people, yes, you can make donations, but you can also do things within your community to stay involved. And that's really what we wanted to do, is just try to provide an opportunity for people to see that there's something everybody can do.
Dr. McGee, you brought up some really positive responses. Yes, I know the boots dance. I don't do it as flawlessly as I probably should. I have to take some lessons. What worries you? I'd like to know, like, at your 5-year mark, what worries you about community response and how the community is activating, if activating?
Well, I think that is what worries me. It worries me that people will get discouraged. and just feel like that, what they're doing isn't going to make any difference. We saw this voter apathy. You have people who don't think they should vote because it's not going to make any difference. What change is really being made? And I think that, sometimes when you take this, you look at this, instead of looking at the small advances or the small wins that you make, and you look at the big picture, sometimes it can be discouraging. So what I encourage people to do is, yes, we may see the rollback of the consent decrees, but in that, we've had people in Minneapolis that are saying, despite the fact that the Department of Justice is saying we don't have to do this anymore, we're still going to do this because we feel like, based on the extensive, evaluation that was done and the things that were pointed out that needed to be changed, we're in the process of making transformational changes, and we're going to continue to do this. So I think the only way to really be able to do that is to be able to try to look at, if there is any bright spots, to focus on those as opposed to the things that are happening negatively. That's just the way, that's the way I've encountered life in general. Where I have influence or where I have an opportunity to make some sort of impact is where I live. Because I think if I allow the things that I have no control over to weigh in on me too much, then I will lose my drive to continue to do the work.
I think you bring up such a good point. And Dr. McGee, I've actually seen your interviews on YouTube and different channels. And the one thing you've advocated for, and I do appreciate that, is a guilty verdict is not enough. It's just not, right? This is, as we talked about in the beginning, a loved one, a family member, a person, a human. And so 5 years later, what does full justice look like to you today?
Well, I don't think I'll ever have full justice. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. It's like full justice would actually be that George would be here, and I would see him at the next family gathering, and he would be practical joking and dancing around and what have you. That would be full justice for me. But I think if we want to, we've got the guilty verdicts. That's fine. But I think what would look like some real measure of justice is that we could then stop seeing countless number of people, because most people are thinking is that after this, to be sure, we won't see people continue to die at the hands of police. But as you and I both know, it hasn't stopped. They still continue to be. So I think for me is, if I can see people continuing to have the energy to want to get out there and fight, to make sure we don't continue to see this fight for accountability for these police officers, and just continue to do the work, is the only thing that's going to really do that. Because as we continue to see people die, senseless deaths, senseless murders, I mean, how can we feel like there's any sort of justice?
So, Dr. McGee, I have two more questions for you. One of them is so perfect because we just talked about justice fatigue. People are tired. I have read it in articles. I have, again, seen it in interviews on this 5-year mark. I think more so after the recent election. And so, as you're turning to our volunteers, the people who do this day in and day out, the social justice of what makes the NAACP so powerful, and they're feeling exhausted and they're feeling defeated, what's your message to them about staying in this fight?
Well, first off, I can say that I feel it too. I mean, let's just be real. I mean, I have our foundation that I work with, but I also partner with many other foundations. I work with Sabrina Fulton with the Trayvon Martin Foundation. I'm one of the ambassadors of her Circle of Mothers. And I work with community in Minneapolis. I mean, I'm constantly connecting the Oscar Grant Foundation, just working with other impacted families to make sure. I think one of the things that has happened is that we are sort of like sorority or fraternity, that we pour into each other. I think understanding that we're not alone, understanding that there are going to be times when one is weak, that the other person's strength will help pull you along. So I think connecting with other people who can help, bring you along and support you when you're feeling low about it. If you get heavy in one area, finding other ways to get involved. Maybe being out there in the trenches may be too much for you. Maybe you fall back and do something in the community. Maybe you deal with voters' rights. Maybe you do mentoring at the schools, or you speak to the kids. I mean, for me, the way that I keep engaged is because there's so many different avenues and so many different ways that I can stay involved, that if the weight is heavy on one side, and then I tap into the other ways that I can get involved. The messaging for me is simple, that everybody has their own strengths and their own gifts. We don't have the same ones. And I think that when you can use what it is that you have to make a difference, and that's the only way that it's going to happen. It's going to take everybody doing their part.
So I'm going to ask one last question. And I would love to hear your most real, raw reaction. And we're a policy advocacy organization. And one of the questions that was asked to me recently about this conversation was the administration requesting pardon. So first, let me say to you, my heart breaks at the thought of just all that could bring for you and your family. Mm-hmm. So let me recognize that right off the bat. But as we're policy advocacy, right, and we're fighting for justice, what's your first reaction to that? And if you had any advice to give the folks on this call, what do we need to do in real time to fight against these horrific things that continue to torment and torture us ongoing? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, first off, I mean, when I first heard about it, I mean, disappointment. I think you go through a bunch of emotions because obviously, all of what we all went through and what the jury and what everybody decided that collectively they saw is sort of a slap in the face to say, I'm going to now pardon it, So I think I was not surprised. I mean, because there was kind of, this sort of rumor mill going around that it was kind of headed in that direction. And if you have seen some of the other things that have happened within this administration, you can't really be surprised that this would be something potentially on the table. I think the only thing that really has brought any sort of solace to the family is that he was convicted not just federally, but by the state of Minnesota as well. And so a pardon by the president will not let him get out. He still owes Minnesota the 22 years. So that is somewhat a relief, but in principle, it's problematic because even though he still has to serve time for Minnesota, what does that say to us if you say, I'm going to pardon him? Says you think that this murderer doesn't need to be held accountable. But I recognize
the message, Dr. McGee, is exactly what they want the message to be, right? Exactly that. Yeah.
And I see that. But the message for me is that whatever is intended to sort of break our spirit or to try to get us to back down or change our position, it won't happen. It simply will not, because it's too important to make sure that people will never forget that the sacrifice that was made. And so we will continue to fight. And I think, the only way that we can do is the people that we've elected, the elected officials, we have to write them, we have to communicate with them. We have to make sure that they are doing their jobs in advocating for us. And if they're not doing it, then we replace them with someone who does. There's time out for people telling us what they want to hear, what they think we want to hear to get in, and then not actually doing the work. They work for us. And so I think that it's important for people to make sure that we hold all of those officials accountable. But at the end of the day, I know that none of us are surprised. And like I said, the emotions were all over the place because even though you kind of heard it and it seems to be picking up some steam, you can almost expect that it may happen any day now. But we're prepared. Our people have been fighting for over 400 years and and
Yes.
we are most definitely built for this fight. But just because you're built for it doesn't mean that you should have to continue to fight for things that really ought to be just, you know, should be part of our everyday life. That equality should be something that we get automatically, like because we deserve it just like everyone else does.
Dr. McGee, oh my God, that's such a powerful statement. We've been fighting for 400 years and we're made for this fight, but it just doesn't mean we always have to.
Mhm.
That's super powerful. Well, I want to thank you so much for spending the time with us this afternoon. I have again followed you, read his book, have looked at all your videos, and I'm just so honored that you had the time to join us, especially at this really significant part of our policy and advocacy. And as we're moving forward, I mean, everything happening right now is so intentional. And it's intentional to
Mhm.
dismantle, to disrupt, to break, to bring down. So I think your words tonight were such an honor to everyone on the call. So Dr. McGee, again, thank you from the NAACP for joining us.
And I just want to say I want to thank you all for having me. I want to thank you for the tremendous amount of support that we've been given from day one. Um, just know that it has definitely helped us to continue to stay on pace to fight this fight because we know we can't do it by ourselves. But when we look around and we see that there are other people who are supporting us, it just makes it that much easier for us to continue the fight.
Thank you so much. And also you're getting so much love in the chat, by the way, Dr. McGee. Everyone's like, thank you. Oh my gosh, this is great. Such an honor. So next on our agenda, we're actually going to talk about the where we're at today when it comes to show us the receipts. And so we know that the murder of George Floyd impacted not only global, but just protests across the country. But what we also know is we saw a corporate shift. We saw monies coming into communities like we had never seen before. We saw companies start to make statements online. We saw that Black Lives Matter was part of some of the hashtags and racial equity movements that companies were going towards. And I thought that it was really important at the 5-year mark because when something initially happens in the economy, we need a few years to really track it. We need to see if commitments that were made were really made. And so I wanted to bring this information to you all because I think it's important for two reasons. One, false promises and false commitments don't just happen in the criminal justice world or happens in the, social justice world. It actually happens in the business world. And we understand that that has surfaced within our economy. Systemic racism, it is embedded in our economy since its inception. But I think what's most important about this next part of the discussion is what is the business case? So we know 5 years ago, and I was able to pull some of these statistics because I wanted you all to understand like what was really going on. 5 years ago, over $200 billion from companies or corporations across the country were committed in the stance of racial justice. 200 billion. McKinsey has done reports. Brookings has done research. There is research all over. And the number actually continues to shift. I've seen 200. I've seen 100 billion. I have seen 76 billion. I have seen 66 billion. But 200 billion seems to be the beginning of the commitment. So over 1,100 organizations committed. It was a mass array of racial justice. 90% of those pledges actually came from financial institutions. Why is that important? Because when we look at the ways that company go, the business case in the economy is always what I'm going to tie back diversity, equity, and inclusion to. What is the most profitable for a company? Where are they going to gain the most profit? And that is if they know a particular population of buying power aligns with their mission, people are going to use their products and services. That's exactly how this works. So more than 90% of the amount, 45.2 billion, was allocated to loans and investments, meaning big banks decided to push loans into particular demographics or communities, but loans actually provides them a return on investment. They gain profit from that. In addition to, there was major corporate retailers across the country that made commitments, like Walmart made a commitment and announced 100 million for their Center of Racial Equity. They retired that back in 2024. It no longer was the priority for them. Next slide. Some other statistics. So in the same report that we look at from data, Target promised 10 million to organizations, including National Urban League, African American Leadership Forum, to establish, and they also established a racial equity committee. Companies not only said that Black Lives Matter, but they took the position of commenting on social justice issues online and on social media platforms. We had not seen that before. Companies pledged hundreds of millions of dollars to advancing racial equity. And that looked like diversity positions, racial equity departments, diversity, equity, and inclusion departments, corporate procurement, the ways that they were giving monies out to communities, so social, corporate responsibility. That also looked like, at the time, diverse hiring practices, and then having metrics where people can actively see their diverse hiring practices. That is what corporations were doing in the name of racial equity. Companies also invested heavily in building dedicated DEI teams. So you all saw in this administration, there was an executive order dismantling diversity and equity and inclusion teams among federal government agencies across the country. But corporations that are not legally liable to do that decided to follow suit because they were fearful if they would be targeted by the administration. In addition to, DEI roles also increased 55% in 2020. It has now decreased across the country. Next slide. So why is this important for you to know? Why does the business case matter? Well, if a company goes out on their own and commits to $200 billion, which we cannot actively track, meaning there is not any amount of research that could really prove, did companies commit financially to what they said they were going to do? We know that companies have dismantled DEI across the country. And so why does that matter? Well, it's about the business case, and it's really more so about consumer buying power. Right now, Black consumers have $1.7 trillion in buying power. That was a shopping report from Nielsen. It was a study that was done in 2024 that actually indicated not only is it 1.7 trillion, but by 2026, it would be $2 trillion. When the community had a uniformed approach to the way that they wanted Black people to be treated in 2020 over the Summer of Unrest, they continued to make sure that companies were held accountable. If you remember, if companies were not going to do Black Lives Matter, if they were not going to make racial equity commitments online in real time, there was a movement that people were targeting those companies. So it was the business case. They wanted to profit. They wanted to build how they can get the most buying power. It is all the business case. Now, have some companies actually done the right thing and have continued their DEI? Yes, we are seeing that. We're seeing where companies are saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to dismantle because I understand the business case. I also want to make sure that my products and services are available to a vast array. What we have not learned yet, though, is in this whole business case model is you can't go back in time. So how do you make the stance today? And 100% how you all are going to impact the business case, how you are going to make sure companies hold equity accountable is where you shop. That's the number one. We've all seen right now that there has been trends that have been going on that when you choose not to shop at a particular place, profits lost, stocks go down, shareholders get upset, lawsuits start to happen. But that's a temporary trend. That is the impact of the moment. But what do we need to do long-term to ensure that the commitments that were made in 2020, diversity, equity, and inclusion still remains? You are valued not only as an employee, but in a place where you could shop, is the Black Consumer Advisory. So in 2025, the NAACP created the Black Consumer Advisory. And we wanted that Black Consumer Advisory to do exactly that, to advise the consumer who stands on 4 guiding principles. And our 4 guiding principles are, and if you guys need that, it's on our website. It is, are companies still hiring diverse talent? And is there diverse talent in their leadership and governance? Second, is there a corporate procurement standard? Meaning there are monies and contracts that are available for minority, women-owned, disabled-owned, veteran-owned businesses. The third, is their social responsibility shifted? Meaning they are no longer giving in specific areas. Now they're just giving. No, we want monies to go back into Black and brown communities. We want scholarships. We want rich community outcomes. So social responsibility. And the fourth is tracking. This is actually really important. In 2020, there are companies that decided part of their racial equity is they would do reports every year that showed how much diverse hiring was done, where the money went, what type of Black-owned businesses they would would gain profit. And a lot of companies are no longer doing that. Well, how do you know when they say, I'm committing $200 billion to the community? How do you know they're doing that if they don't have the data to show us? There's no transparency. And so the Black Consumer Advisory teaches our consumers where to go get the real-time information, what companies are doing it right, what companies are sticking to those pledges that they made, and what companies are not. Now, here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to tell you exactly where to shop. We're not going to say, don't shop here, and we're not going to say, shop here. What we are giving you is a list of advisory. And the reason we're not going to do that is some of the companies that may not be practicing diversity, equity, and inclusion may be the only food source, pharmaceutical source, or retail source in your community, right? So we cannot in any way deprive a person from having the gain of goods and services, and especially pharmaceutical support. But what we are saying is if you have options, use those options. Use the Black Consumer Advisory to really advise you on what's the best way to spend your dollar. And the last is in the business case, we don't always have to go through corporate America, the Fortune 100 companies, to get our goods and services. Buy Black. There are several different websites, Buy from a Black Woman, NASPRO. We've been looking at those websites to really think about where can people go to get this product and service directly from the consumer, directly from the seller, meaning you just cut it out. We don't want to deal with large retailers. We want to support Black-owned businesses. Supporting Black-owned businesses not only allows the Black-owned business to profit directly, but you're also being able to create more jobs, more opportunity, and the ability for Black-owned businesses to grow. Because we don't want small Black-owned businesses. We want small Black-owned businesses to get medium and then large, and then having the ability to also reproduce workforce and opportunity. And so if you have a chance, we really want you to take a look at the Black Consumer Advisory. Always know that what you're looking at is your choice, but we want you to make the right choice. We want you to really think about that $1.7 trillion buying power, because that is the only way that we're going to hold diversity, equity, and inclusion accountable, and also bringing it back to the commitments and promises companies made 5 years ago at $200 billion. We're still waiting to see the receipts. We haven't seen them. So this is the way that we hold that accountable. And now I'm going to turn it to Wisdom Cole, our Senior Advocacy Director, and he is going to talk about the call to action. What does everyone need to do, and how do you all get involved with the things that we provided you all today? Wisdom?
Thank you so much, Keisha. Let's put some W's, let's make some noise for Keisha in the chat for all the information that she provided for us. 5 years later, we want to make sure that we are showing the receipts. Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, Jarvis. Again, let's show some love in the chat for Keisha and for Dr. McGee. The work that she does each and every single day to ensure that we are keeping this issue that is so important to us alive is absolutely necessary. I think that in this moment in time, when they want us to forget, when they want us to not be engaged, we have to lean in more than ever, right? In this moment in time, we have to rely on one another. We have to ensure that we are working in community and defending and protecting at all cost. Just reiterating what Keisha shared around signing the Black Consumer Pledge. This Black Consumer Pledge is very important for the NAACP, for its members, but for Black America, right? How do we ensure that we are spending intentionally, right? Making sure that we are thinking of before we buy, making sure that we are supporting Black-owned businesses, that we are demanding accountability for corporations that have cut out diversity, equity, inclusion, that we are advocating for change, right? It is more important than ever that we are continuing to push the policy necessary to support all of our community and that we are staying informed. Again, if we can drop the Black Consumer Pledge in the chat for folks to sign that. If you have not signed it yet, please take a moment to sign it right now on the call. If there are members in your branch, people in your community, leaders who are part of your executive committee, please make sure that you are sharing this Black Consumer Pledge. I think it's so important for us to ensure that we know what we're fighting for, not just on our personal level, but on the economic level with our dollar. Connecting it to the work that we are doing, particularly around demanding uniformed police reform, right? We want to ensure that the members of Congress, our elected officials, are advocating for us at every single level of government. You heard earlier in the call, Dr. McGee talking about the end to qualified immunity. About 4 years ago, I had the honor and the privilege actually to travel to Minnesota and talk with the mayor of Minneapolis and talk with community members and really see the site where George Floyd was murdered and engage with members who are there day in and day out. And during that trip, they really pushed and enforced that we need to end qualified immunity, right? We have to ensure that when people are murdered in our community, that there is accountability. Another way in which we do that is by ensuring that we are collecting data on police encounters, right? We need to ensure that there is transparency. Police are supposed to be protecting and serving all of us. And so to ensure that we have safe communities, we have to collect those data on police encounters. And I know that we have come so far, but there's still a lot for us to do, a lot for us necessary to ensure that we are protected continuously. And so in the chat, I'm going to drop a petition that we've been running for quite some time to ensure that we are demanding uniformed police reform, right? This is going to be necessary for the changes that we need to see in the upcoming years within this administration. And want to make sure that we have your support. Definitely share this again with your members, with your community. We want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and pushing all of their elected officials at every single level. And last but not least, if you have been on our calls for the past week, for the past month, we have been really making sure that you are aware about what is happening in Washington, D.C. We know that they are coming for our social safety nets, right? We know that there have been cuts to Medicare to Medicaid, to Social Security, to SNAP, to veteran benefits, right? The people who have protected us throughout our lifetime are losing out. In this moment in time, we have to urge our congressional members, urge our elected officials to act now, not later, but now. right? These things are currently being discussed. These budgets are being slashed, and the resources necessary to sustain and support and protect our community are at stake. The NAACP has been working together to ensure that we are messaging to our elected officials that we too are as American as justice, that we too deserve the civil liberties that we have worked so hard for, that we too deserve to be protected because we too are American. And so we have launched our As American As landing page. Here you have the opportunity to share your story, to learn more, to ensure that you have the resources and tools to continue this fight, right? If you want to figure out how to talk to your neighbors, how to talk to your elected officials about it, we got you there. How to share information on social media, we got you there. If you want to send a direct message to your congressional member, we have you there. All of this is on our landing page. We want to make sure that you have the resources necessary to continue and to fuel your advocacy. And so again, using the philosophy of the NAACP, use the power of five. Are there 5 people that you can ensure that you share this resource with? Are there 5 people that you can ask to ensure that they send a message to the congressional member? Are there 5 social media posts that you can put out there to make sure that people are aware about what is happening in time? Because all of our future is at stake. And so it's important for us in this moment in time to ensure that we protect those who have protected us. Again, thank you so much for joining this webinar tonight. We want to open up the floor to you all now. If there are any questions, we have a Q&A chat there for you to drop your questions. If we have a little time, we might have some time to pull some people up to ask their question live, but want to see if there are any questions from tonight's webinar for Kesha, for myself, possibly anybody else from the team who's here tonight. We want to ensure that we are giving you the tools to further your advocacy. Any questions in the chat? Any questions in the Q&A? I see Georgia Price. Georgia, I'm going to ask you to unmute and definitely feel free to ask your question live.
Wisdom, I just wanted to ask you, do you have a toolkit of like letters that we can send to the senators?
Yes, regarding George Floyd?
Yes.
Absolutely. We have those letters available on our website. We also have a fact sheet that if somebody can pull, we can drop that for you here in the chat. Similar to our letter that we are sending around budget cuts, we do have some templates and some information that you can share directly with your congressional members.
And do you also have letters that we can send, like the different things that's going on, like with the Medicare and the cuts with the Social Security and all that good stuff too, that we can send to the senators?
Absolutely. And I'm going to drop right now the direct link in the chat for that one. It's simple as putting your information in there, and then it will automatically populate the letter, and you can send it directly to your congressional member.
Thank you. I'm going to do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jared. Thank you so much for joining again on night 2. Thank you for your active participation in our Civil Rights and Advocacy Training Institute. I see Tamia with their hand up. Tamia Temple.
Yes, hello. I have 2 questions. The QR code that was posted on the last slide for the feedback, it's not working. The website says, oops, something went wrong. So I just wanted to let you guys know about that. And then for the Black Consumer Pledge, for the website, can I share my screen? I just want to make sure I'm signing the right thing.
Gotcha. Let me make sure I have it. I think I have it up right here.
Okay, yeah.
Black Consumer Advisory Pledge.
When you like scroll down, it says like sign the Black Consumer Pledge. Let me see. Yeah.
Come down here.
That right there where it says contact information, is that the pledge or is that where that or is that where you sign up for like the email blast? Like, is that right there, the pledge?
That is the pledge right there.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, great question. And as you can see from here, you can sign the pledge. It shows where companies stand at. It also shows what is at risk.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. And then I will also drop, thank you so much, Amari, in the chat. We have the survey that you can take for feedback on tonight's webinar. I see Dorothea Lassiter's hands up.
Hey, I'm Dorothea. So with all the energy around, what's going on with immigration, the suppression of free speech, and what's going on with Palestine, is there a reason that we're not joining with other groups? It seems like there's a tremendous amount of energy, and the more enemies that the Trump administration makes, the better. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. I just feel like there's momentum out there that we maybe are missing.
Yep. Kesha, you want to take this one?
So, Dorothea, I think there's a couple things. We just had our resolutions process. This is probably a good place to start. And our resolutions process is something very true and dear to our heart because it sets the tone for how we look at policy and advocacy as an association, not only from the national staff, but what has come up from folks in the field and what they want us to work on as well. And so this year I think every year we have an overwhelming positive response and the amount of work that wants to be happened. But I think the chairman, and when we were at resolutions, I know Wisdom was there as well, so Wisdom keep me true, but it really was about we cannot do and be all things to everybody because of the association, the policy, the forever shifting. And so we do have a stance. We do have particular resolutions that are addressing the things that you've brought up, specifically around freedom of speech, specifically around some of the other things that are happening with immigration. I know our Office of General Counsel wrote a resolution on that. So there's definitely going to be some emphasis as we get through. The other thing to think about, Dorothea, is we're in May of a 4-year administration. And you all know that things that are happening in real time may not be the same thing tomorrow. So as the national staff, we really have to allocate our time, resources, and capacity and be efficient so we are around to continue to handle and fight for the next 4 years. Because it's been a lot of fight already in just the first 5 months of this year. But I'd love to hear from Wisdom. I know he's the guru at field advocacy. So Wisdom, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Kesha. I think right now, in this moment of time, things are rapidly changing. But it's very important for us to ensure that we are staying consistent. I think it's really important that we consistently disrupt, that we consistently re-inform to make sure that folks are speaking up on our behalf. A lot of our traditional allies in this moment of time are intimidated to speak up. And so the way that we win is by being consistent, by continuing to sound the alarm, by continuing to educate and make sure that people know the most up-to-date information, that we are combating the intense amount of mis and disinformation that we're experiencing online, that we're experiencing in real time, and then ensuring that we are in solidarity with movements across the nation and the globe, right? Somebody said this in the chat, talking about how do we look back to history and the ways in which our movements have formed. Time and time again, we have seen from the civil rights movement to the Black Power movement to the Black Lives Matter movement, and so on and so forth, that the way in which we win is not fighting for the liberation of only one group, but fighting for the liberation of us all. And so we have to work interconnectedness, we have to partner, we have to coalition build, and then we have to be able to examine the issue from every angle. But thank you so much for that question. I know folks in the chat are ready and willing to get into some good trouble. We're going to take one more question. Hannah Parker, I see your hand. Feel free to share your question.
Good evening, and thank you, Wisdom. Thank you, Kesha, for a great presentation. I just in the presentation, we were talking about, the black dollar, buy black. I'm all for that, right? The question I have is a why question, and I know it's not a fair question, but I just want to put it out there anyway, as a member of Gen X who lives now in a rural community, realizing that resources can be limited. In fact, I do live in a food desert. Many people do rely on certain dollar stores and big box stores, sans Costco and Trader Joe's, for their products. Why are we not asking people to wholesale forgo spending their money at certain retailers, realizing that the Montgomery bus cut, right? Those folks were asked to not ride a bus, right? They were asked to make great sacrifices. The community stood up and drove them to places. They made it happen. Why are we not holding ourselves accountable? And I say ourselves literally, right? And our communities that we serve accountable for doing the same thing and making said sacrifices.
So Hannah, there's a couple things there, and I'm going to unpack the first. So in the presentation, one of the things I had mentioned, and I agree with, is because we understand that there are parts of the community are deemed persistent poverty, marginalized, and or low income census tract, all of that. Resources and the ability to purchase food, the ability to have pharmaceutical connection, or just the ability to have retail is always going to be harder. So it is really hard for me to sit in a position understanding the dynamics of economy, understanding the dynamics of how social determinants work, and say to a person, you cannot go to that particular retailer. That is your only source of food and living, right? Your only source of connection. The other part to that is why I emphasize buy black is when we think about how the economy circulates with dollars, when you're able to directly purchase from a consumer, or consumers directly purchases from a buyer, the money and the tax exchange goes directly to that business. When you take a Black-owned business and you put them in a retail store, a percentage of their profit actually goes back to the retailer, right? And so if we think about Black economy, generational wealth, building retail, understanding how we circulate Black dollar within Black community, so more jobs, bigger company, bigger trade opportunities, more profit. That is why the buy Black is such an intricate thing in the way that we move forward when we think of generational wealth. And I'm all for wholesale. So let me also say that. I'm all for wholesale. I think that there's an opportunity to always save your dollar. We are in an inflated market. I know Wisdom's like, she's way too technical. I know. I get very nerdy on the economy stuff, guys. I nerd out. But we're going in and we have inflation. We're going into a massive inflation. We have tariffs. We have the housing market has not gone down. Rates are up. Taxes have shifted. And so 2025, we're just watching the gasoline. 2026, the dumpster fire will happen. And we're watching that in real time. So anytime I can tell a consumer to watch your money and save, have that ability to have discretionary income, because I can assure you it will not be available very easily in the future. That's always going to be my first economic financial advice. But we also know in order for the entire Black economy to function, we have to remove sometimes the big retailers and directly buy Black in order for that profit to make sense. That's all. The end. So it was a lot, I know.
Well, thank you so much for your question, Hannah. I really appreciate that. And as well as everybody else who asked a question. I'm really grateful for you joining tonight's webinar. I know some folks were trying to stream it on the YouTube. My apologies. We were not able to get the stream up on the YouTube, but we will make sure to send out the recording for this webinar. Want to just give some quick instructions before I give Kesha the last word. For those who are going to be attending the next training by policy that's going to start in 7 minutes at 8:30. And so you're going to have to exit the Zoom to the lobby and then rejoin there. Is that correct, Chuck?
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. So again, make sure that you exit out of this Zoom, go back to the lobby, and join for the next session. But we'll turn it over to Kesha.
So I want to thank everybody for being here. When Wisdom and I thought about this a while back, we knew that the 5-year mark was such an intentional thing to have a call about. We know that the administration continues to find ways to disrupt and dismantle the hard work we put into place. I think Wisdom's done a phenomenal job of really articulating all of the work that the NAACP is doing, and even more in real time, day in and day out. We want to thank Dr. McGee because this has been, a very busy time for her, and also a time of mourning and grief. I mean, this is the 5-year mark of a death of a loved one, and she made the opportunity to come here and talk with us tonight. We want to encourage you to go to the NAACP website, pull up the Black Consumer Advisory, go to our resource page, look at some of the links that we have, and really advocate for how we can continue this journey after 5 years. Continue to fight for the rights of people, and use this as the example of, we don't want to see 5 years ago be 5 years now and another 5 years later, and we're still fighting. At some point, we just need to rest. So I want to thank everybody for coming, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, everybody.